Hello everyone, I am back with a new fanfic part 1, and if you enjoy this fanfic, so don't forget to subscribe my channel. Today fanfic title is What if Naruto was reborn as Hashirama's grandson and became Konoha's ultimate prodigy. Now let's start the fanfic. What's in a name? What did names even mean? Why did they matter? Those questions had meant little to him in his first life. He'd been named Victor, a simple strong name that any man could be proud of. It led to a lot of Victor Von Doom jokes, but he'd long acknowledged that those jokes were entirely a consequence of his own actions. After all, he'd been the one to make the choice to hang out with the 12 people in 1,000 who knew that the famous MCU villain had a name as common as Victor. In this world, however, in his second life, for lack of a better term, things could not be more different. His name was a million things in one. A statement to others, and a warning to him. Hashirama Senju. The Triumph, his first name translated into an innocuous enough name if one didn't consider the context. His mother, Hinori Hyuga, the twin sister to the Hyuga clan head, had chosen to bestow the name on him because he'd been born on precisely the day that the news returned to Konoha that the Great Shinobi War had come to an end. Even in his thoughts, he did not dare to refer to it as the First War. When he'd called it such, it was only his age that saved him from a spontaneous lynching in the crowd of grieving parents, spouses, and children. His name and his blood, as well. Whether he carried the stereotypical Senju looks or not, little could be done to deny the fact that he was the grandnephew of the second Hokage, Tobirama Senju. Pay attention, his minder hissed at him, and he nodded, looking down at the crowd of mourners. That was what had brought his thoughts to his age. Once again, the festival of remembrance had come about, and this time, like all others, he was forced to attend dressed in a mournful sober black and forced to maintain a sober contemplative expression. He chanced a glance to the side and noted his older cousin looking boldly bored out of her mind. A 15-year-old Tsunade Senju was a force of stubborn energy that could not be denied. She'd thrown a stinker at being summoned to stand at the same position she'd occupied in every procession. The same stinker she threw last year, and the year before that. Regardless, she stood. She made it clear she didn't want to be here, but that was the best that she could do. A cough drew his attention to the man that forced the stubborn slug summoner to his will. Tobirama Senju, second Hokage of the Leaf. Uncle. He moved the hat on his head before he tossed it to the side completely. He bared his pale skin to the audience and showed off his long white hair. Welcome. Once again, we stand together in mourning. In mourning for what has been taken from us. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, all gone at the hands of the enemy as they sought to do the impossible. They tried to extinguish the will of fire. Every year, we hold this procession to mourn, and every year I remind you all that they have failed. What they sought to extinguish burns hot and bright. 8 years ago my nephew, Itama Senju, son of Hashirama, was killed in an ambush from cowardly shinobi of Iwagakure at the twilight of the Great War. Now, I present to you his son, Hashirama Senju. What did he mean? I felt my minder push me forward and my legs complied before my brain could stop them. I covered the few steps that separated me from my granduncle on the rooftop of the giant Hokage tower in what felt like slow motion. My eyes twitched as I looked for some sort of salvation from whatever this was to be. Searching for my mother was a waste of time. She didn't attend. Few things could rouse her from bed, and a memorial in her late husband's honor was not one of them. I met Tsunade's eyes as I walked past her, and for the first time today she was paying full attention. Sharp eyes followed me on every step I took. When I finally reached him, I felt strong hands grab onto my shoulder as I was turned around to look at the crowd. I gulped at the sight. It looked like all of Konoha was here. Thousands of citizens lined the walkways, surrounding the tower and stretching back far and wide. This was the village hidden in the leaves in her full glory. My nephew will continue his education at the Konoha Shinobi Academy in the hopes of living up to his father's legacy. The hidden stone thought they would rob us of one of our own with their cowardly attack, but here Itama's son stands. Ready to take up his father's mantle in defense of the will of fire. I urge you all, follow Hashirama's example. Enroll your children and wards in the academy today. After that, I zoned out. My thoughts were flooded. The Shinobi Academy. I'd never been an idiot. I knew that as a descendant of both the Senju and Hyuga clans, I'd be expected to become a shinobi one way or another. But nothing had ever been said about the academy. From what I knew, the academy was for civilian children. Clan children received their tutelage at home. My tutelage had been handled by a rotating contingent of retainers from the Hyuga branch family. Everything from etiquette and calligraphy to taijutsu and shuriken jutsu had been covered in those lessons. They told me of my genius loudly and often. I had no doubts that I was quite ahead of my age group. So why was I being shunted off to the academy? What kind of stunt was that? One thing most people didn't know about Uzumaki Mito was that apart from being a wise old woman, she had one hell of a temper. And the second that she'd gotten wind of what had happened at the Remembrance Festival, she wasted no time in showing up to the Hokage Tower. In fact, she was sitting down on the chair that her husband had once occupied by the time that we'd returned from the festival. After Tobarama's speech came a ton of ceremony. There would be music, and dancing, and various ninjutsu performances. It was still a somber affair, but every year it became just a little bit less so. Just 4 years ago, the thought of music would have been ludicrous. Tobarama was a genius when it came to using progressive overload to make the citizenry get used to adding more and more celebratory tones to the festival. A necessary one, he replied with a sigh, not contesting her presence on his seat. A decision that I was sure was a wise one. Mito was an old woman, but she was still the nine-tailed Jinchuriki for a reason. She had strength aplenty. How? Please tell me how announcing the whereabouts of my grandson to every spy and agent of the other villages can count as necessary. She asked, tone calm but having the subtext of something dark. I looked up at Tsunade, not sure if I should even be here in the first place. I know the risks. We'll have to trust in the academy security, but the enrollments in the academy from the civilians still hasn't recovered to the levels from before the war. Every analyst assumed that after a few years, along with all the new benefits being created for families with children in the academy, that we'd get the numbers back up, but we haven't. I chose to change tacks. The truth is they won't trust the academy because the clans don't. If they see the son of Hashirama's eldest going to the academy as well, then that might be enough to get them to consider it, at the very least. It's also going to be good for enrollments from Clan Ninja. The other clans still want to get as close to the Senju as possible. Having Shorirama in the academy tells them that that's the place to do it. He explained, trying to win Mito over with pure logic. Even with the best of the best watching over him, Hashirama had to deal with assassination attempts every other week. That was how much the others feared him. Even Tsunade, his Junin granddaughter, has had to deal with much the same over the years. Now you want to present them the target of my other grandchild? No, Toby. No, I refuse, she said. The edge in her tone was now unmistakable. You don't really get a choice in this, the second Hokage, well-known negotiator, said next. Even I could see it was a blunder. It didn't take a second for the chakra in the room to begin to choke the air out of my lungs. Nope, I heard from beside me, and the next thing I knew I was back on the rooftop safe in Tsunade's arms. Shorirama-sama, do it like this instead, the Hyuga branch member said, directing me through the forms of the advanced gentle fist kata once again. I made my best attempt at copying his movements, but even I could tell that I wasn't getting it quite right. Is everything alright, Shorirama-sama? You usually pick things up faster than this, he asked, making me want to snap at him. In fact, when I opened my mouth after whirling to face him, I could see that he expected me to snap. He cringed backwards a little, and that little movement was enough to make me snap out of it. I just have a lot on my mind. Why am I even learning this in the first place? It's not like I'm ever going to get the Byakugan, I said to him, running my hands over my black hair. I thanked the gods that I hadn't inherited the rough hair of the Senju. Hyuga hair was much easier to manage. Looked better too. We've covered this before, Shorirama-sama. Even without the Byakugan, the gentle fist can still be utilized as the basis for a devastating taijutsu style. Even beyond this, while the inability to see individual tenketsu means that you'll never get to use the gentle fist to its full potential, a liver shot is still a liver shot. And with chakra added to your strikes, you'll cause as much damage as any gentle fist user. Besides, You've only been practicing for 5 years now and you're already working through the advanced forms. Not letting a genius like you work with the gentle fist would be a travesty, he said to me, combining legitimate feedback with some good old arse kissing. I nodded at him, scowl still on my face, and returned to the session. From the corner of my eyes, I could see grandmother Mito watching me from the balcony. Even though mother was the sister to the Hyuga clashed, I was still the grandson of Hashirama. There was only one place where I could be expected to grow up. The Senju clan compound. Sure, the Hyugas sent dozens of their household staff to ensure mother lived in the luxury she'd grown up used to, and probably to make sure they had some influence on my upbringing, but don't say that one too loudly. When I failed my next attempt, I heard clapping from the balcony. I turned again, and noticed that Tsunade had joined grandmother on the balcony. And now was being scolded for her mockery. The smile that spread across my face at Tsunade's abashed expression was bittersweet. I turned back to my instructor, his Byakugan focused on me as I went through the forms once again. My head still wasn't in it, but I managed to make sure that I didn't make any mistakes as I went through the forms. Well done, Shorirama-sama. Now a few more tries and it will be perfect, he said with a smile on his face. Hayate was a man who smiled easily and acted like a puppy in the body of a man. He was skilled, easily on the level of a Junin, but his easygoing nature and timid personality meant that he got to spend his days training brats like me instead of writing his name in the history books with the blood of Konoha's enemies. He got a good deal. Not a deal that I'd ever get, however. I had expectations. Alright, that's enough for today. I'll take over my grandson's training for today, I heard from above as grandmother Mito began descending the stairs. She did it slowly for the first few steps before turning to my cousin and barking, "Come help your grandmother, you fool girl." Tsunade wasted no time in catching up to her and helping her down the stairs. But Mito-sama, Tobarama-sama agreed with the elders too. Hayate was cut off almost as quickly as he began. "I don't care what my brother-in-law has agreed with your clan. This is my grandson," she said firmly. Any other member of the Hyuga clan would have stood their ground. Not Hayate. The man bowed and disappeared with a shunshin almost immediately. I had no doubts that he was going to report to whatever elders he answered to. "Now that it's just family here, what do you say we do something fun?" She asked me and my smile could have blinded the sun. There was one thing that lessons with Mito meant. Sure, she'd been a skilled enough shinobi in her time, but what made her truly special was her prowess with fuinjutsu. That was what she spent her time trying to pee down to me. "Come along with us, Tsunade," she said, dragging my cousin with us once she noticed her attempt to disappear in a shunshin of her own. "Fuinjutsu is so boring, GGG, Tsunade drawled as Mito began to physically drag her with us towards the practice room, her act of being a frail old woman long abandoned. "Yay fuinjutsu," I said, pumping one hand in the air. Pretending to be an 8-year-old could be fun, sometimes. Especially for annoying foolish cousins. What distinguishes a seal in fuinjutsu from a hand seal used in ninjutsu? She asked the both of us as we sat in seiza before her, scrolls out and brushes it out left-hand sides. That was an interesting trait we shared, Tsunade and I. Left-handedness. I racked my brain for an answer, while it looked to all the world that Tsunade had mentally checked out from the lesson. I knew that in canon, Tsunade would become competent with fuinjutsu, competent enough to have a seal on her literal forehead, but the fact that even then she'd be considered lesser to both her teammates said a lot. With a pedigree like hers, no one should have been able to come close. She just wasn't interested. A direct opposite to me, at the very least. I had a passion for fuinjutsu. Partly because of how easy it came to a brain that had aced university-level physics, and also partly because of how necessary it would be. Fuinjutsu was one hell of an equalizer, and it was one of the few things that could bridge the gap between Junin and the literal natural disasters in human skin known as S-rank ninja. It was my theory that only the flying thunder god could have made Minato a monster capable of running circles around 2 or even 3 S-rank shinobi at the same time. Sure, he never managed to actually kill them, but surviving to tell the tale was a feat on its own. Needless to say, I had a shit ton of motivation feeling my interest. Fuinjutsu seals are written, but hand seals are done with the hands, I finally said after racking my brain trying to come up with something at least more inspired. Tsunade's instant chuckle at my response was not the most encouraging thing, but I'd long since learned not to expect encouragement from this version of the Sannin. She was firmly in her troublesome teens and had somehow decided that being a sarcastic bitch to everyone who shared blood with her was the ideal way to assert her independence and maturity. Never mind that she still lived in the clan compound and spent clan money on whatever whims caught her fancy. Sure, she donated her entire pay to the clan, but that was besides the point. Something slightly more than the readily apparent, Shori-chan, Mito deadpanned, making me flush entirely against my will. That was a good one. Fuinjutsu seals are more varied. There's as many as 369 characters in the Uzumaki script alone, and it's just one of dozens, but there are only 12 hand signs. 12 standard ones, at least, Tsunade suddenly said, making me turn to her. The way she rolled her eyes at me once she noticed my attention made me want to curse out loud, but I just took the loss. It stung to lose to someone who wasn't even trying, but that was the way the world worked. Slightly better, and close to the actual answer. But wrong still, Mito said, making me want to jump up and celebrate. Tsunade's smug look was wiped off her face quicker than grime in the face of a pressure hose. An accurate answer lies in their purpose. Hand seals regulate the flow of chakra in the body. They act as a crutch for ninjutsu or genjutsu, telling your chakra to contort itself in a predetermined manner. That is why when you get skilled enough, you can shave a few seals off a jutsu or even abandon the use of seals in their entirety. As she spoke, as if to demonstrate her point, the world around us began to shift as she seamlessly placed us both under genjutsu while her hands were on the table for us both to see. First of all, my view of the scene became monochrome before the world started to shift as colors swam into my vision from the edges in a chaotic mess. I looked to my right, only this time I wasn't able to see Tsunade anymore. Suddenly, everything crashed around me as I felt myself return to reality. While Fuinjutsu does something else. It couldn't care less about how chakra flows within your body, although there are quite a few seals that can help with that. Instead, Fuinjutsu seals tell reality itself how to behave. Fuinjutsu allows you to impose your will on the universe. To master Fuinjutsu is the closest humanity can come to visiting the realm of the gods. That is why you can never remove seals from a matrix without finding a way to compensate for it. Reality is a dense, unyielding thing. And to even bend it, you have to play by its rules. That is what separates the seals we Uzumaki use from the seals that the rest of the world is familiar with. She said, staring at the both of us, trying to convey the importance of her words with her stare alone. I thought I understood it then. I'd find out in time that Mito's words were the tip of it. Why do I have angry Hyuga elders bombarding my secretary with requests to meet? We heard a voice from behind us. A familiar voice. I whirled around TP faced with the familiar white robes that Uncle wore on a daily basis. The robes that marked him as the Hokage. Well, not just the robes. The robes and feet adorned with shinobi sandals. I looked up to his face to see him looking down at the three of us with a raised eyebrow. Neither Tsunade nor Mito looked shocked to see him. Of course, they'd sensed him coming. I wanted to have a lesson with my grandson. Surely, your politicking cannot rob me of that, grandmother said with a snarky voice. I could already tell that she wasn't in a good mood for the interruption. You were privy to every aspect of the negotiations, Mito. You know that we had to make compromises for us to even get to raise him here. The marriage agreement Itama signed was very specific, and getting out of it was a feat in and of itself. I don't care. He is my grandson. I wanted time with him, and I got it. You're the one sending him to your foolish pet project and reducing the time he spends at home in the first place, she said, pointing right at him in an accusing tone. I already explained my reasons for having him join the academy. It worked, even. We'd got as many as thrice the number of applicants in this year's batch, he said, looking very proud of himself as he reached up to adjust his hat. Still, his time at home is reducing and I wanted time to teach him valuable skills. The Hyuga were teaching him some useless kata among a dozen that no one would even get to use in a real battle, she said, not having the best opinion of Hyuga taijutsu. Mito didn't have the best opinion on many Hyuga things. If I didn't share their appearances so thoroughly, I was sure she'd have had a few choice words to say about their looks as well. I will speak with the elders. We will renegotiate Shorirama's schedule to make room for your lessons with the inclusion of the academy. And free time for him to play as well, Tsunade added, tossing in her 2 cents. There aren't enough hours in a day for such frivolity. Don't be ridiculous, he denied without even giving his grandniece a look. If that is settled then, I have Shorirama now. He's the right age for him to start with the trials, Uncle said before reaching down and grabbing my shoulder. I didn't hear Mito reply before I found myself in a completely different location. Looking around told me we were on the cliff face that would become the Hokage rock in time. It overlooked the rest of the village, and the view was truly breathtaking. Do you know why I've brought you here, Shorirama? He asked, joining me at the edge of the cliff, looking over the village. No, you said something about trials, I replied. Well, trials might be the wrong word to use here. Are you aware of the clan traditions? He asked. No, I replied simply. That was the truth. I knew so much about the Uzumaki and Hyuga clans, but when you compared that knowledge with what I had about the Senju, it was pitifully lacking. Yes, I am to blame for that. As the eldest male in your family, it is my duty to teach you about the clan history and traditions, but duty has kept me away for much of your childhood. He said, sounding slightly apologetic. That was enough to make me look up in surprise. I'd known Tobirama for all of my new life, and if there was one thing he never did, it was apologize. He and Mito had had so many fights about it. Well, this is one tradition that we can't really negotiate, he said, turning away from the village to look at me. I mirrored his movements and looked up to meet his eyes. Our clan name, Senju. 1,000 skills or 1,000 hands, depending on how you see it. It comes from the fact that even back in the Warring States period, no two Senju shinobi were the same. We had such a wide range of skills and focuses. Just look at my brother and I. We were both trained by our father, Butsuma, and the arms master, Kentetsu, but our fighting styles could not be more varied. He said, launching into an exposition that I found difficult to relate with our previous conversation. I know, granduncle, I said, in reply. All these were things I knew already. I might not have had fixed lessons on Senju clan history, but even the most proud Hyuga wouldn't dare lecture me about my proud ancestry without even glossing over the most famous men on either side of my bloodline. Hashirama and Tobirama. One who ended the Warring States period, almost single-handedly, and another who led Konoha through the largest war that the world has ever had the displeasure of witnessing. What you don't know is why. Each one of us is unique. It is a feature of our clan. Everything, from our affinities to talents, tend to be varied. That means that unlike the Uchiha who have a single test for determining when one becomes an adult, we wouldn't dare put something so limiting. They have the Great Fireball Jutsu as their test. This is ours, he said, turning to me and beginning to weave seals. I watched him with sharp eyes, cataloging and forcing everything to memory. My lessons had included a lot of the things I needed to be a successful shinobi. One of them was the ability to memorize things with only one look. Not everything, but a string of hand seals was easy enough for even me. Tiger then ox, tiger again, and ending in the rat seal. Tobirama smiled at my attention on him. I must have salivated as I focused on him. The Hyuga clan weren't known for their ninjutsu prowess, and with the earliest parts of my education being entirely in their control, it was no surprise that this was the first true piece of ninjutsu I would ever be learning. Water release. Water bullet, Tobirama said and spat out a condensed stream of water that shot through one of the trees in front of us and continued to go forwards, covering the distance at an impressive speed before it dissolved. He smiled at me before he started going through more seals. More than one jutsu. Boar right pointing arrow, ram right pointing arrow, snake right pointing arrow, horse right pointing arrow, dragon. His hands moved through just as languidly as the first time, and this time he stretched out both hands at the end of the string of seals. Lightning release. Electromagnetic murder, he said as his hands flashed white and multiple streams of electricity shot out of said hands before slamming into a conveniently placed boulder that they shattered into nothing more than a collection of loose stone. Still, Tobirama did not stop. He formed only a single seal this time. The bird seal. Wind release. Air bullets, he said before inhaling and breathing out a condensed series of breaths. The jutsu was invisible to the eyes, but I noticed its effect when it landed, tearing through several trees and leaving small circular holes behind. More seals began as Tobirama turned away from the forest to the cliff face. This time, they were seals I was more than familiar with after seeing them so many times in the anime. Snake right pointing arrow, ram right pointing arrow, monkey right pointing arrow, boar right pointing arrow, horse right pointing arrow, tiger, he used, holding the tiger seal in front of his mouth as he inhaled an impressive amount of air before breathing out what could only be described as a firestorm. It was loosely contained in the shape of a ball of fire as it streaked across the village sky. I wondered then why he had chosen this spot of all others to show me ninja techniques. It was also curious that of all jutsu to overpower so heavily, it just happened to be this one. Fire release. Great fireball jutsu, he said as we watched the ball fly over the village before it began to dissipate as Tobirama cut off the stream of chakra and it found nothing to latch onto. And now the last one. He said to me before he began to flip through the next series of seals: tiger right pointing arrow, hare right pointing arrow, boar right pointing arrow, dog or ram right pointing arrow, dog right pointing arrow, ox right pointing arrow, snake. My suspicion that it would be an earth release jutsu were proven accurate when he bent and slapped his hands on the ground before saying out loud, "Earth release, earth wall." A massive wall of pure stone rose from the ground in front of us in seconds. As I beheld ninja magic in person, this was just something else. One powerful jutsu from every element. That's the test? I asked, looking at him in shock. That's the test for the clanhead's bloodline, he specified, giving me a significant look. So this wasn't what the rest of the clan had to go through. It was for Asanas alone. Tsunade passed this? I asked him, shocked. She never seemed like a ninjutsu specialist to me. Here, Tobirama scoffed in reply. Barely. Your cousin was content to display the barest competence with each of the techniques. Enough to pee, but definitely not what I will be expecting from you, he said to me. Of course. No pressure at all. He seemed to realize the impact his words could have as he turned towards me and bent down on his knees. You, Shorirama, are the product of two of Konoha's strongest clans. Two of the strongest clans in the entire world. The Hyuga enjoy a long history that goes back just as far as ours, and you are the product of the best of both those bloodlines. Grandson of Hashirama, the greatest senju to ever live, and great-grandson of Hiashi, greatest Hyuga to ever live. You have so much potential in you. Potential to be greater than every single one of us who came before you. No pressure, indeed. Finally posting this. The next 3 chapters are up on the Place of Patrons, same username is up here, so feel free to check it out if you want to support my journey, but don't stress if you can't. Everything will come up here in its own time. She resisted the urge to look behind her again to catch a glimpse of him. Long black hair that reached his shoulders and a warm smile that made it look like he had no worries in the world. She already hated him. He was the reason she was here. The youngest of the Uchiha clan heads 4 children, and the only one that would be expected to waste her time attending an academy to be taught by people unworthy to even clean her father's boots. She'd be the first Uchiha from the main family to enroll in this shinobi academy, and it was that bastard's fault. She heard his laughter come from behind her. Loud and easy as he entertained a group of civilians, asking about their lives and telling jokes. The joke hadn't even been funny, she thought to herself as the civilian-born joined him in his loud laughter. She'd expected to be the first one here after arriving almost 30 minutes early, all so she could secure a seat at the back where she wouldn't be disturbed. Shockingly, she'd come in and found the classroom filled to the brim already. Most of them already knew each other, talking and trading information with ease. The opening ceremony, she suspected. She'd missed the event a day earlier, wanting to deny the reality for as long as she could. So what did you do next? She heard him ask the Inuzuka from across the room, intruding into the conversation the dog boy had been having with the Nara girl next to him. She expected the Inuzuka to put him in his place, tell him to butt off and mind his business. Of course, her expectations weren't met. The Inuzuka turned back with a wide smile on his face and began projecting his voice to tell the story of him sneaking into the kennels and meeting his companion to the whole class. So Heimaru, Mom's Nankeen was sleeping but his mate wasn't. And she was pissed to see me. She tuned him out and began to go through her memories to find something to occupy her. She absently noted that she would have to come along with a scroll or something to read tomorrow. She thought of all the things she could have been doing with her time instead of this. She could be working on her great fireball jutsu. Father said she was coming along faster than any of her brothers had managed to. She could be the youngest to perfect the jutsu since Madara himself if things went well enough. At least, that was what she thought. Having to spend half her day here would be one hell of a time drain. Almost like the universe was taking pity on her and deciding to be merciful, she heard a sudden ringing from the outside. A bell. With that cue, a man body flickered into the room. The light green vest around his upper body marked him as a chunin. Good morning, he said to the shocked class, only getting replied by the Senju boy who practically sang his reply. Bastard. Welcome to the Ninja Academy. I am Uraraka Kichizune, chunin of Konohagakure. You will refer to me as Uraraka-sensei. He said. XX. She felt a hand on her shoulder and almost jolted if she didn't hear his voice immediately after. Want to go out for lunch with us, Uchiha-san? I have extra, he said, looking down on her with those black eyes of his. He looked like a puppy. Like the one the Inuzuka boy had on top his head right now. No, stay away from me, she said, swiping his hand off her shoulder with a negligent flick of her own. Part of her delighted in the way his smile died. But it was a temporary feeling as by the time he looked back up, the smile was back and as bright as ever. Let's go guys, he said to the rest of the class. They followed him down. Not the whole class, it turned out, as she looked up to see someone standing in front of her desk. What are you doing? He asked her, staring down at her with eyes that she knew mirrored hers. No one in their generation had inherited the Uchiha looks as strongly as the both of them had. What does it look like? Sitting down to eat lunch, cousin, she said, looking at him like he was stupid. Sometimes, Izuku was actually stupid. Why were you so rude to Senju-san? Your father sent us here to make friends and allies, not alienate the entire clan one day, she scowled at the reminder. We're not here to make friends with the Senju, though. Father couldn't care less about the Senju. He sent us here to befriend the other clans. Remind them that we were just as involved in Konoha's founding as the damn Senju. And do you think being rude to the Senju, the one they all see as their friend, would make that any easier? Get out, she snapped finally, turning to her lunch and resolving to ignore him completely. She heard his footsteps as he made to leave the classroom, leaving her behind. She hated it here, she decided finally. She hated the damn Senju, and the Inuzuka, and all of them, and Uraraka-sensei, and even stupid Izuku. How was the academy? He asked as she wasted no time in barreling towards him like a rocket. She didn't bother noticing the rest of her classmates being picked up by parents or siblings, or even Senju being escorted away by a servant. She didn't care about the rest of them. She had her brother here with her. Terrible, Tenjin. I hate it there, she said, wasting no time in beginning to make her case for never returning. Really? Why? It's just the first day, he said, sounding taken aback. They don't like me. None of them. Senju has them all wrapped around his fingers. And that's why you want to leave. Are you saying it's not a good reason? I'll let you discuss that with father. Instead, how do you feel about going to get some dango and then kunai shopping? I think we can get you your own set since you'll need one at the academy. Her bad mood wiped away instantly, like clouds chased away by the sun as her brother reached down to pick her up and then plop her on his shoulders. She laughed as they began to cover the distance to the dango shop in a leisurely walk that made the wind blow across her hair. She almost slammed her head against the table at hearing that particular voice as they walked into the weapons shop. That bow, uncle, she heard him say right as they entered. They didn't turn around to look at them as she walked in with her brother, but she could make out that cloak and hair anywhere. It was the second Hokage, and with him her hated nemesis, Senju Shorirama. They were both looking at a highly ostentatious bow. Beautiful, but much too showy for her tastes. Of course it would be the kind of thing Senju would like. It was made of gleaming wood. Rarer than the wood on any of the hundreds of trees within the village, definitely. Like every other bow, it was a curved piece of wood with a string tied to either side. The wood was a deep black. If Hachiman was here, he'd identify the species of tree that gave the wood, and even its age and when the wood was harvested with just a single look. Made of ebony, young Senju-sama. It is a good choice, the store attendant said, and she resisted the urge to roll her eyes at the obvious sales tactic. Surprisingly, Senju didn't appear to be fooled by that. It is beautiful, I agree. But perhaps something simpler would be a better choice for the time being. You are to be a shinobi, after all, the Hokage said, addressing his grandnephew. To Uzume's surprise, the undoubtedly spoiled brat actually listened to the Hokage's wisdom and they moved on to search for a different bow. She wondered what they were even looking at bows for. He wasn't going to be a samurai. He was going to be a shinobi. Shinobi don't use bows, she said to herself. Everyone knew that. Even the weakest of her genin cousins could throw a kunai faster than the most skilled samurai could shoot an arrow. They could probably throw it with more force than the arrow, she added. Let's go get your kunai, her brother said to her, pulling on her hand to take her deeper into the shop. The last thing she heard from the Senju duo was, I'm an adult now, you know. From the younger one as his uncle began making other suggestions than a bow of all things. XX Nara Shikahime. How troublesome, she whispered to herself as she entered the classroom to find the Senju boy sitting tight next to the only empty seat in the classroom. The fact that none of the civilians had claimed it made it clear that it was being reserved for someone else. The fact that she was the only one yet to take a seat made it clear that she was the one the seat was being reserved for. She almost turned back to head home. She could already tell that this would end up being a lot more trouble than it was worth. The Senju boy was much too popular for her to spend a day next to and have any hope of a quiet one. Take a seat, Nara-san, Uraraka-sensei said as he walked in from behind her. There was no way the man would let her just decide to turn around and go home. She, with great reluctance, took step after step, counting them to be 7 just as her mother taught her until she was at her seat and had managed to ignore all the eyes on her. She sat down and waited for the man to begin. It's been a month since the first class. Just like I promised you then, today we will have the placement tests to divide you into your specific classes, the man said, and suddenly a piece of paper revealed itself on her table. Genjutsu, she surmised. Looking across the CL showed the only one to have been unsurprised by the genjutsu to be the angry Uchiha princess. Indeed, instead of focusing on the test on her table, she was looking their way and muttering in irritation. Whatever the Senju had done to set her off today, Shikahime knew she wanted no part of. She stared at the test sheet in front of her. Most of the questions were relatively easy to answer for someone like her who had grown up with shinobi all her life and been trained to be one from before she could watch. In fact, the only ones having any true difficulty with the test were the civilians. Among the clan children, she could see only the Inuzuka having any real trouble with his answers, and even then he still had half his sheet filled in the first 10 minutes. As for her, she couldn't deny the temptation to fail the test. Mother would be disappointed, but father would understand. Being in the same CL with so many hotshots was bound to be nothing but trouble. 2 Uchiha, 1 Hyuga, the Senju prince, and members from basically every clan that made up the village. If there was one CL that would have all the attention and thus trouble thrust at it from the get-go, it would be that one. Father would do the same in her place. But mother would look at her with those eyes. She was sent here to get close to her cousin. To preserve family relations, mother had said. Code for make sure that the Senju don't forget who exactly her mother was and that the Nara were now tied to them by blood. She chanced to look at the little prince from the corner of her eyes to find him with an easy smile on his face, doodling in the corner of his paper. Whenever a civilian tossed a look at him, he would grant them an encouraging smile. Almost saying to them, you can do it. One would never have guessed at his Hyuga heritage with just how much emotion he managed to show with those brown eyes of him. Said eyes met hers, and she instinctively broke the look and returned to her paper. Mother being cross at her would be even more troublesome. The woman was just the sort to show up at the academy and demand they let Shikahime retake the test. No, troublesome classmates were much preferable at the end of the day. She wouldn't be sleeping in the same building as them. She knocked the questions down one after another, only writing enough to show that she understood what she was being asked. She'd leave overachievement for the Uchiha princess who seemed keen on answering every question with as much detail as possible. Instead, she followed her cousin's approach. She wrote down the answers quickly, and after drying the ink with a quick flex of her chakra, she flipped it around and tried to zone out into her thoughts like she'd always been able to. From memory, she began to recite the tale of the first shadow to herself, her many times ancestor, Nara Shikamaru. Alright, that's time up, from Uraraka-sensei jolted her from her thoughts. She allowed him collect her test sheet even as she noted several civilian children begin to rush to fill in undoubtedly wrong answers on the empty spots on their sheet. The man was unflinching as he grabbed each and every sheet in order as he walked through the class. Whatever tears or begging he received went ignored in his flat expression. Dull black eyes simply staring down those who dared resist. When he got to her, he tossed her a smile as he turned her sheet over before giving her cousin a long flat look as he caught a glimpse of the back of his test sheet. Shikahime looked over to see what the Chunin was looking at and almost tripped on her chair as she suddenly stood up. The rest of the classroom turned to her, before their eyes turned to the Senju boy. Is this supposed to be funny? Uraraka-sensei demanded and her cousin just shrugged with a smile. She almost cursed herself as she got a better look at the sheet as her sensei thrust it at her cousin. He hadn't been doodling on the back of his sheet like she thought. No, the troublesome piece of work had drawn a full-blown explosive seal on the back of his test sheet. She'd seen enough of such seals in the clan armories to be able to tell them apart from any other. The Uchiha princess looked similarly astounded as she got a look at the seal while the rest of the CL were left to wallow in confusion. Detention. Trust me, your guardians will be hearing of this, he said, making her cousin's smile die out a little bit. Nara-san, return to your seat. The seal is inactive. It's a dud, her sensei said to her, turning to pin her with a reassuring look. Not a look that she'd have expected after the anger that had been on his face nary a second ago, but she took the assurance for what it was and returned to her seat. If she moved it along the floor a little bit to gain some distance from her clearly insane relative, then no one could judge her. We'll be heading outside for the physical tests now, Uraraka-sensei said, prompting a whoop from the Inuzuka boy in front. Inakuro, she remembered from the introductions. The academy's training grounds were a wide-open field most of the time. Today was different. Someone had gone to the trouble of setting up a complex obstacle course. She could already make out a climbing wall, swinging logs that had to be avoided, a tightrope that had to be run across and some swinging rings that one had to jump across, along with a dozen other tasks on the course. Troublesome. She silently judged it to be. If the first test had been easy, then this one would be anything but. So how would you get past that tightrope? She heard one of the civilian boys, Takehata Toshiro, ask their resident Senju prince as they stared at the course. The safest way is to turn around and climb across it with one's hands and knees. It would be faster to just run across it, however, her cousin said, unknowingly echoing her inner thoughts on the matter. She'd probably be able to run across it with ease. It went without saying that each of the clan children had begun training to become shinobi long before being enrolled at the academy. In fact, she was willing to bet that the reason most of them were here was the boy behind her. The grandson of Hashirama, the first Hokage, and the grandnephew of Tobarama II. In line to take over as clan head after his granduncle. So who wants to go first? Their sensei asked, only for no one to step forward after a second. In the next second, both the Senju and Uchiha children had stepped forwards. Senju Shorirama, you will go first, he said, making the angry Uchiha princess stare daggers into the man. If the rumors were to be believed, then their sensei would have fallen dead a dozen times over. Shikahime figured that if the Uchiha could indeed kill by staring with those eyes of theirs, then this one hadn't learned that technique yet. XX Hyuga Uraum. She walked into the classroom, momentarily stopping in her tracks. There, right in the middle, 2 seats from the front, and 2 from the back sat her cousin. Senju Shorirama. It's 6 a.m. she told herself as she watched him notice her and then erupt into a smile before waving at her. How could he have arrived this early? It didn't even make sense. She decided to leave home at a ridiculously early hour so she could beat him to the academy for the first time, and now he was already here. How are you doing, cousin? Good morning, he said to her, smile bright and hands spread out in a wave. Well met, cousin. I do hope I have a good morning. I wish you the same, she said in reply before walking in and taking her seat one away from him. Last time she'd sat at his right-hand side, but since he'd gotten bored and made an explosive tag in CL yesterday, father had been very clear that she should keep a cautious distance. So far away, cousin, he said, calling attention to her choice of seat. No offense is intended, cousin. I woke up feeling bilious and with a raging headache. I felt it would be better if I sat next to the window, she said, lying with ease. Her cousin smiled at her, believing her words with no hesitation. It made her wonder, just like she had been doing for the weeks they'd spent in the academy, whether he was worth all the attention he received. Even before enrolling, she made sure to be constantly informed of the progress he made. According to Kabuki, he was skilled with the gentle fist, but still quite a bit behind her when it came to expertise. He knew more kata than she did, but when it came to sparring, he was apparently leagues behind her. That fact alone made her wonder if he'd turn out worth it. Father thought he could be Hokage one day, and quite frankly she could not see it. He was intelligent, to be certain. Physically skilled, as well. The only ones who could compare with his when it came to physical tests were the two Uchiha, herself, and the Inuzuka boy. The rest of the CL were well behind them, with the clan children closer than those of civilian breeding. Her cousin had returned to reading from his scroll, so she settled to wait as their classmates began to trickle in. She noticed how, like yesterday, he went to the trouble of ensuring that no one sat at the seat to his left. Saving it for the Nara girl again. She'd asked father why, and his best guess had been the blood relation that he shared with her. Her mother had been his grandfather's cousin, after all. That made them cousins, but not as close as she had with him. His mother was her aunt. That made her his closest relative close to his age. When the CL filled up, and even the Nara girl had entered, their sensei appeared in front of them with a body flicker. She subtly activated her Byakugan to make sure there wasn't another genjutsu ensnaring their perception. The fact that she'd fallen for the first genjutsu yesterday had grated at her more than she would have been willing to admit. With her dujutsu active, she noted the two other chunin behind the door. There are 37 of you in this CL now. We will be dividing you into classes of 3. With each CL having roughly 12 students apiece. If you hear your name, you should please follow Jinpachi sensei as he leads you to your new classroom, he said as one of the men behind the door walked in. His brown hair and brown eyes marked him to be what she'd heard her cousin impolitely refer to as an NPC. For some reason, he viewed having a regular appearance as the first sign that a person would not be destined for greatness. It was ridiculous, but had a strange logic to it. Uraraka sensei went on to list out 12 civilian children who followed their new sensei out of the classroom with a mixture of confusion and excitement. They didn't realize what was happening. When the next set of names were read out to follow the next teacher, she noted that this time they appeared more despondent. These ones were smart enough to realize that if they were being separated into classes the day after taking a test, then it had to be based on that test. The fact that not a single clan ninja had been called with their group should have made it obvious that they weren't in the premier group. I'm sure you've figured it out now, he said as they remained 12 children in the classroom. We've been split up according to ability, the sole civilian in the classroom pointed out. Yes, you have. This is CL1A. You all performed the best in the assessment tests. But don't let that get to your heads. Your place here is not set in stone. Every 3 months, you will take assessment tests along with the other classes. Only the top 12 will remain here. If you ever fall below that, then you'd be reassigned to one of the other classes, depending on where you fall along the rankings. He said, making the half of the CL that had begun to whisper among themselves sit up suddenly. Just so you know where you fall in this class, rankings and how close you were to being on one of the other classes, here are the rankings. 1. Uchiha Uzume. 2. Senju Shorirama. 3. Uchiha Izuku. 4. Hyuga Uraum. 5. Kurama Kizaru. 6. Aburame Shiba. 7. Nara Shikahime. 8. Takehata Toshiro. 9. Sarutobi Omoikane. 10. Yamanaka Inokan. 11. Akamichi Choni. 12. Inazuka Inakuro. As each person heard their name, They proceeded to straighten up in their seats. She was unsurprised to have ranked below her cousin and the two Uchiha. They'd all made short work of the obstacle course in a way that she had not. The gentle fist did not require much in the way of flexibility, and so her tutelage had lacked that. The Uchiha's intercepting fist had a high flexibility focus, her studies had told her, and Kabuki had revealed that her cousin spent a significant portion of his time stretching and had taken up dancing of all things. For the rest, the list fell just as she'd expected it to. The fact that the Inuzuka boy had performed better than her at the obstacle course and still somehow ranked last probably meant that he'd basically failed the written portion of the test. She could understand that. The test had been more difficult than she'd expected. It even covered some things that she'd yet to learn in her own studies. Another surprising fact was the presence of the civilian. He'd performed worse than everyone in the room at the physical tests. He'd even performed worse than some of the civilians that had been sent of the room to one of the lowest classes. The only way he'd managed to rank so highly would be if he'd gotten an essentially perfect score on the written test. That was impressive. Now that you know where you stand, our first lesson will be on chakra natures, her sensei said as he turned to the board and wrote down the day's topic. First of all, what is chakra? He asked, and half the CL rose their hands. Not her cousin, he never volunteered his knowledge like that. Nara-san, the sensei said, pointing at one of the few people without a hand raised. The girl looked like she'd been about to fall asleep. Uraum resisted the urge to sniff haughtily only by the tightest of margins as a result of the most precise application of will. Chakra is the combination of physical and spiritual energy, she said simply before returning her head to its position on her palm. Uraraka-sensei was pleased with the answer and moved on. Perfect. That is a textbook definition. Chakra can only be utilized in one of two ways. What are they? He asked, turning to the CL again. This time, Uraum was one of only 4 people with their hands up. This time, the sensei pointed out someone with a raised hand. Takehata-san, enlighten us. Shape transformation and nature transformation. Shape transformation works by using control of one's chakra to force raw chakra to take a shape outside of one's body. It is usually used in conjunction with nature transformation as there is no known jutsu that consists of pure shape manipulation. Nature transformation works by transforming raw chakra within one's body into one of the 5 primary elements or a composite element made from a combination of any of those 5 elements as seen in Kekkei Genkei, he said, and she wondered where a civilian could have come across such information in such detail. Lovely answer, Takehata-san. He's wrong, her cousin cut in, making the CLTURN to him. Is he? Tell us why then, Senju-san, their sensei said, turning to him with sharp eyes. There aren't 5 chakra natures. There are 7, he said, sending Uraum reeling as she counted them off in her head: fire, water, earth, lightning, and wind. She mentally recited, running through them in order. 7. Tell us more. Fire, water, earth, lightning, wind, yin, and yang, he said. Yin and yang, what were those? You are correct, Senju-san. But both yin and yang release are beyond the scope of the curriculum, so we'll be operating under the fiction that there are only 5. He said, confusing the CL further. Uchiha Izuku. He funneled his chakra into the slip of paper as he'd been taught to by his uncle. The chakra paper, expectedly, crinkled at the edges before bursting into flames. He'd only paid it half his attention. Like he was sure about his cousin, he'd taken this test before. Most of his attention, therefore, was on the other members of the classroom. Sarutobi Omoikane and his cousin both had their slips erupt in flames in showy manners, to the shock of absolutely no one. The Nara girl having an earth affinity was interesting. Izuku could only imagine how dangerous the clan's shadow manipulation would be with the ability to use earth release to create or extend shadows at her whim. Only if she learned elemental ninjutsu, however. The clan was famous for their laziness in that respect. Senju Shorirama's slip was perhaps the one that had the most attention directed at it. Would he favor water release like his granduncle? Maybe even water and earth like his grandfather? Lightning like his father? The one that was said to have been so skilled that it had taken the Raikage himself to kill him? Or even fire? Fire would not be unprecedented. This was the land of fire at the end of the day, and while the Senju clan tended to have diverse affinities, fire was still the most popular in their ranks. The Senju seemed to know that his slip was what everyone waited for, and he took an agonizing amount of time in funneling his chakra into the paper. It was almost like he was trying to punish them for paying so much attention. Izuku found that unlikely, on its own. If there was one thing Shorirama liked and excelled with, it was being the center of attention. Maybe this was his attempt to give them a show and hold on to the attention by dragging things out as much as he could. Finally, chakra went into the slip of paper and it began by splitting in half before soaking through and then dissolving into dirt. Wind, water, and earth. 3 affinities. That was nearly unheard of. Even having 2 like Izuku did was noteworthy, but 3 was just something else. The entire CLWAS staring at him and he just smiled at them all. Now that everyone's affinities are known, we will begin covering the theory around elemental training. Uraraka sensei's words drew all the attention to him. Chappie done and dusted. The next 3 chapters are up on the Place of Patron's same username is up here, so feel free to check it out if you want to support my journey, but don't stress if you can't. Everything will come up here in its own time. Troublesome, she thought to herself as she walked into the classroom and found the seat that she'd been forced to occupy for the past 2 years filled by someone else. She almost tripped over her feet in surprise when she entered and found the Kurama boy sitting next to her Senju cousin. She'd expected the boy to get bored of her eventually, but the fact that it had taken him 2 years to do so was just something else. By his right sat Uchiha Izuku, the only polite member of the family in her generation. She wasted no time in taking her seat blissfully far away from the spotlight that followed the Senju on every waking hour. She heard a sound from their place in the center of the classroom and enjoyed observing from a distance the melodious tones the Kurama boy produced with the flute he held in his hands. It was a beautiful thing, made of pale wood that was so white it looked to be ivory from certain angles. The holes were perfectly circular, just as the mouth opening was made perfectly suited for the boy's mouth. It was the work of a master craftsman, and the sheer cost of it would probably have bankrupted many a family. A lovely gift, Senju-san. Shorirama, please, Kizaru. I've told you a dozen times, call me by my name. Well, that answered one question. The gift had come from the Senju boy. Of course, he had Hyuga blood on one side and Senju on the other. She doubted anyone would ever have access to the kind of wealth he did. The bulk of the village was built on Senju land, after all. Play me something else, please, he said after the Kurama boy said something to him. A melodic tune began to spread across the classroom. A haunting tone that both said everything and nothing at the same time. Shikahime would hesitate to call herself an expert in music. No, Nara really could. But she did know what good music sounded like. She'd attended enough festivals and celebrations to make it clear to her what a master of their craft could produce. What she heard Kurama Kizaru produce was not at all far away from what those people could create. It made her wonder when he'd begun practicing the instrument. It also made her wonder just how the Senju boy had been able to find out about it in time to procure such a gift for the other boy's birthday. It didn't matter though. Spending her time basking in the privacy of not being the center of attention should have been enough for her. She leaned backwards and hoped to drift off into sleep. She should have had 20 minutes until their sensei showed up. Of course, the universe decided to put all her expectations to shame. Her desk exploded in sound as someone slammed a hand down on it. She opened her eyes and came face to face with orbs of smoldering coal that looked like they were permanently alight with fire. Uchiha Uzume. Her black hair fell down her face in ringlets that framed high cheekbones in perfect lighting. You're on my seat, Nara, she snarled, and it took Shikahime a second to parse the words and realize that the rude girl was indeed right. Somehow in her relief and haste to find a seat away from the center of attention, she'd ended up on the seat that the Uchiha girl favored. She cursed herself for it, knowing that she'd now have to stand up and move all the way across the classroom with everyone's eyes staring at her. Not once did the thought of resistance cross her mind. Only 2 people could match up with the Uchiha girl when it came to the ninja arts, and she definitely wasn't one of them. She prepared to stand up, and the bad situation suddenly got much worse as she felt a hand on her shoulder. What are you doing, Uzume? Her cousin said, staring down the Uchiha girl with his head tilted to the side. Your little cousin is on my seat, she said, stepping closer to the boy who had taken the space between them. Shikahime wanted to roll up in about ball like a child and cry her feelings out. Because how had this gotten this bad? She knew that she should be thankful to her cousin for stepping up to defend her, but she wanted nothing more than to scream at him for standing up and involving himself in this. If she hadn't already been the center of attention, then having the two best students in the clin a face-off over her choice of seating position would ensure it. I'm sure no seats have any names on them. The seats are first come, first served, Uzume. Sensei has made this clear more than once, I know. And so do you, he said simply, weathering the glare that she tossed at him with no discernible reaction. I've sat on the same chair for 17 months, Senju. Don't play with me. Her voice rose now, making Shikahime shrink further in the chair. No longer a whisper that promised violence, her voice was now a snarl that assured it. Doesn't matter, he said, and in the blink of an eye, he caught a punch that had been sent flying at his head. Now, the entire CLWAS on high alert. Uchiha Uzume proved to be deserving of her CL ranking as the number 1 student by sweeping her leg forward and sending a high kick slamming for his head. Her cousin simply released the hand in his grip before moving his head backwards an inch to allow her foot to sail past his face with no effect before rushing at her. Shikahime had very little doubts about how this would go. It was only her cousin's terrible shuriken jutsu marks that made him second place to the Uchiha girl. It was a testament to his skill that the gap between them was still so close when one considered that he was dead last in the CL when it came to kunai and shuriken throwing. He stepped into the Uchiha girl's space before she could recover from the attack and released a duo of quick jabs at her face. The first hit, she used the momentum to send herself rolling backwards. She came up weaving hand seals, only for her hands to be caught in a solid grip before she could continue. A great fireball jutsu in a closed classroom is more stupid than anything I've ever seen any of you attempt, Uraraka-sensei's voice rang out. Shikahime absently checked the clock and noted that they still had about 10 minutes until the bell was supposed to ring. That, at the very least, went a step in confirming her theory. Senju-san, Uchiha-san. Detention. You will both be staying behind after CL today, and this incident will be going on both your records, he said, before moving back to the front of the clan picking up a stick of chalk. Today was supposed to mark the beginning of survival and camping training, but since you all clearly have too much energy, we'll be doing some endurance training instead, he said, the rest of the CL predictably erupting in mutinous groans and whispers. Even her cousin winced at the announcement. Endurance training wasn't fun for anyone. Especially now that Uraraka-sensei had begun adding genjutsu detection training to the mix. Chop, chop. You should be at the lineup already. Last there gets to do an extra lap for good measure, Sensei said, and the CL moved almost as one. Her cousin was, predictably, at the very front of the line with his unholy speed. She hastened to take off and join the others. She couldn't end up being the one to take the extra lap. Sarutobi Omoikane. He lounged against the tree stump while taking a look around the gathering. He hadn't thought that this would be what the gatherings would look like when he'd first heard of them and pursued an invitation. He'd expected secret training of powerful ninjutsu or something like that, but while Izuku-san and Shorirama-san did show off some ninjutsu on their own, it definitely was not the center of the meetings. These were, and he still felt strange thinking it, almost like leisurely gatherings. The idea that the Senju heir, the cousin to Uchiha clan head and so many other clan heirs would gather during the weekends to play music and games would have been ridiculous to him if he wasn't looking right at it. How's the grill coming along, Choni? He heard the Inuzuka say from his position opposite him and turned his attention to the Akamichi who was expertly managing a large outdoor grill and flipping pieces of meat on it. Next to the grill was a platter of various fruits and vegetables that had been provided for the entire gathering but would only end up being touched by the Senju who refused to eat meat for whatever reason. Speaking of the Senju, he was in the complete opposite end of the courtyard in front of a series of targets. Next to him stood Uchiha Izuku and they whispered between themselves for a bit before Senju walked backwards and primed the bow. In the space between seconds, the bull's eye of all three targets had arrows sticking out of them. How? He asked himself, suddenly sitting upright. He heard the Senju bark a laugh as the Uchiha boy seemingly shared his shock at the state of things. Play us something, Kizaru. Izuku owes us a song, the Senju said, walking away from the targets and dragging his Uchiha friend with him. Senju Shorirama vs Uchiha Izuku, Uraraka sensei said, gesturing to the raised platform set aside for the sparring matches. The friendly duo wasted no time in marching to the platform and taking their places. Ready to kiss the ground? Shorirama-san asked with a smile on his face. Yeah, this isn't going to be anything like last time. Before Shorirama could offer a reply on his own, Uraraka-sensei interrupted, commanding them to form the seal of confrontation. They executed it in unison, and once Sensei's hand fell, the Uchiha was on the move. He ran forward in quick, long strides before kicking at his opponent's head. The boy with hair like silk weaved around the attack with ease before trying to step into his friend's guard. Izuku sent off 2 quick jabs. Both were dodged in succession. The Senju went on the attack, sending a knife hand at his friend's throat that forced him to flinch backwards. He wasted no time and took advantage of the hesitation, stomping on the other boy's foot and refusing to let up. Izuku's attempt to pull his foot out from under his friend was met with harsh resistance. Shorirama unleashed 3 quick jabs into his friend's face before lifting his foot and allowing him to backpedal. Izuku stumbled backwards for a second before abandoning his training and diving right at his opponent. They landed on the floor with a harsh crash, the Uchiha on top. He scrambled to press his weight down on Shorirama before lifting his upper body a bit. He wailed into his opponent, punch after punch, hitting the Senju boy in the face even if they failed to do much damage on their own as Izuku couldn't get much force behind them. As Izuku pulled his hand back for another punch, Shori's head followed him, slamming into his friend's forehead and sending the boy reeling. Suddenly and smoothly, Shorirama used his footwork to grab a hold of Izuku's waist before rolling them over so he was the one on top. And when on top, he wasted no time. 3 punches in and all of Izuku's resistance had faded. Shorirama landed 2 more punches before standing up and pulling his dazed friend upright to join him. Good show, boys. Now form the seal of reconciliation, Sensei said. Izuku needed a second or two to get his wits about him, but once he did, he formed the seal in good faith, and they left the platform. Inuzuka Inakuro vs Uchiha Uzume, Sensei said, making Omoikane sigh to himself. There was only one way this was going to go, and it wouldn't be fun for anyone watching. The Uchiha girl was way too aggressive and brutal, while the Inuzuka boy had much more pride than common sense. She'd beat him black and blue while he'd keep standing up to take more and more. He was a glutton for punishment. Just like he'd predicted, the fight began with Inakuro running right at Uchiha-san. She weaved underneath both his swipes before punching him in the side. Kidney shot, he heard Shorirama wince to himself from behind him. Inakuro flinched but showed no more pain than that as he commanded his legs into a kick that Uchiha-san had an easy time bending underneath. She sprung up with an uppercut that he stepped away from. It was the beginning of a combo, however. Not one that Inakuro was well poised to deal with. She punched at his solar plexus, forcing him to block before she kicked him in the shin. He stepped back, but she used that opportunity to tangle her feet with his and force him to the ground. She stepped backwards, allowing him ample time to stand up. He didn't take the display of sportsmanship well and dove right at her just like Izuku had done with Shorirama. The difference here was that he telegraphed every aspect of his dive, and Uchiha-san had ample time to react. She jumped upwards, stretching out a single foot that Inakuro's head slammed into. He fell to the ground, battered and unconscious. Kurama Kizaru 9 years before the Second Great Shinobi World War. He watched his favorite classmate walk into the room with an easy smile on his face. He'd just finished with his assessment tests, and like exactly everyone expected, ours seemed to have had an easy time of it. Of course he did. None of the outs they'd asked Kizaru to do had been things Shori had had any difficulty with at all. After all, it had been him who'd helped Kizaru learn everything it would take to PTHE exams. Especially the ninjutsu. For a family with a preternatural disposition for genjutsu, his family had an equally famous aversion to most forms of ninjutsu. The fact that the academy required to C-rank elemental jutsu of one's own element as a precondition for graduation would probably have ruined him if not for Shori. How was it? He heard Izuku ask. Of course he would be the first to ask. Kizaru noted how the kind boy's cousin paid increased attention to the answer that Shori would give. At the beginning, he'd been very much against the friendship the boy was building with Shori, especially since his cousin was very publicly and openly doing her best to ensure that Shori lost the top spot at the academy. He'd thought the boy had been some form of Trojan horse like Shori had told them about in that story. But 3 years together and he had to accept that the boy was mostly as genuine as he appeared to be. Even if Kizaru still thought he could see something sharp lurking behind the boy's eyes when he thought no one was looking. That was the hardest test I've faced in the academy, he said with a hearty laugh, forcing Kizaru to crack a smile. Looking around showed him that most of the CL shared the sentiment. Shori was famous for never finding any of their exams or tests difficult in the slightest. Even when, 6 months ago, Uraraka-sensei had given them an impassable test to teach them about failure and the dangers of arrogance, Shori was the only one who didn't have any difficulty with the questions. He'd even somehow managed to get a perfect score on mathematics problems that were so far out of the syllabus that even Chunin would have had difficulty solving them. That's not a lot to go off of, Toshiro said, making him smile and shrug again before he walked in and took his seat in between Kizaru and Izuku while Toshiro himself was called in to take his test. Your test sounds very different from mine, he said, turning to his friend. You mean they didn't make you fight a Chunin as well? He asked with a laugh that rang hollow in the face of the class. Sudden silence. He'd fought a Chunin, a middle-tier ninja. Sure, Chunin weren't necessarily the strongest of opponents since their strength could vary wildly. He could have fought a Chunin from the cryptoanalysis squad or something, but the fact that he'd fought one, taken shorter than everyone else had on their test, and still come out unscathed was a feat beyond feats. If Kizaru wasn't personally aware of his terrible lying skills, he'd have accused Shori of trying to pull their legs. He could see some of their classmates coming to that conclusion on their own, and he almost tsked in disappointment. Shori never smiled when he lied. He did it with a straight face. Sure, it was the perfect way to deliver something that one wanted to be taken seriously, but considering he'd not even been able to avoid cracking a smile when he had to break the news to Inakuro that he'd broken his puppy's leg in their friendly spar, Kizaru had concluded that he'd smile no matter what. Only when he lied did he manage to avoid it. What do you think our teams will be? Izuku asked, making Kizaru slam back to attention. Team assignments. That was one thing that he'd been both thinking about and trying not to think about at the same time.